Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Xamarin University. My name is Mark Smith, and we are very excited this morning to have Brian Randell with us. Brian and I go way back, and we've known each other a long time, and he has spent a lot of time in the area of DevOps and kind of working through all those processes, and now he's going to apply that expertise to mobile apps and bring some of that knowledge to us and share it with us. And so we're very excited about that. Brian, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Mark. It's wonderful to be here, and it's a wonderful Monday morning here in Southern California.
Yeah, that's a lucky place to be. I'm afraid it's a little bit cooler where I am, and I think it's a lot cooler where Rob is today. But we're excited, and so let's go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, welcome, everyone. This is DevOps and Mobile Apps. Do you really care? I think you do care because you're here this morning, but who am I? Just a little background on myself. I'm a partner with MCW Technologies. I've been a consultant for more than 20 years as well as an educator. As Mark mentioned, we worked together at a training company in the late 90s, early 2000s, doing lots of hands-on engagements, and over the years moved to doing both digital and in-person training. I spent a lot of time with the Microsoft stack, so I'm a Microsoft MVP focused primarily on their ALM tooling, which we'll be talking about today with Xamarin. I also work with Pluralsight as part of the technical staff. I'm working on a course on Visual Studio Online. And occasionally I get behind the keyboard and do some writing. My most recent work is Professional ALM 2013 from Rocks. My email address is up there, my Twitter handle, as well as my blog. So if you want to get a hold of me afterwards, please feel free to do that. So let's just jump right into it. When you think about what is DevOps, right? I mean, let's be very clear. I'm acutely aware that this has become the buzzword of the day. I've been involved in it a long time, and for some of us, it really is a repackaging of some of the better practices we've learned over the years. That said, when it becomes the buzzword, the good news is that means both vendors, educators, and companies are paying attention to it. So let's take one of the well-known quotes out there. That basically DevOps is this trend, right? And the whole point at the end of the day for DevOps is to increase value to your customers, whether those are external customers that get your app through an app store, or it's internal enterprise customers using your application. At the end of the day, it's all about agility. How can you deliver rapidly but at high quality, right? And making sure you're delivering what your customers need. Right? It's something that gives them a sustainable business advantage is to be able to respond. We have to talk about in software how it's a first mover advantage. If you can get to market first or even second with the best implementation, that can give you that competitive advantage that ultimately leads to more sales, etc. Right? And at the end of the day, I like staying employed. It's just this crazy thing. My banker wants money for me to pay my mortgage. And so I want to be in the hotspot of technology, which is going to keep me employed and keep my company happy. So when we think about the question of why dev, right? Well, the bottom line is because it's tough out there, right? When you think about building applications, right? Business is faster, competition is fiercer, right? And so that, once again, that time to market, that agility is absolutely key to success. And so when we think about building software solutions, right, there's lots of challenges we face, right? There's a general frustration around software. I mean, I live with software, but my family, I get called, I get screamed at when something goes around the house, right? If the internet's down, it's my fault, right? If my wife's iPhone starts acting up, it's my fault, right? There's a general frustration when things don't work. We've become dependent upon technology in our day-to-day. The delays picture is kind of real and metaphorical in that, right? We consistently have seen software delivery delays in the industry. This has been a continuous problem we've had for years. When you think about airlines, I remember last year I was speaking down at Xamarin Evolve in Atlanta, and Delta had, around that time, a couple days earlier, had a system failure to where they were writing boarding passes by hand. So the lack of technology just coincided with that just general frustration with technology. Another big issue we run into with software delivery is, do we know what we're delivering? Are we delivering what our users want? And so this often comes to the fact that we don't have a lot of insight. This is particularly painful when you think about the disconnect between consumer software and developers, right? It's a little better when you're developing an enterprise, but sometimes, surprisingly, not much. So we really need to have better solutions for this. Now, we think about the consequences of having an inefficient software development practice, right, and not doing DevOps. What are we seeing as the problem? Well, we often think about these three major groups that are involved in software delivery, right? With the developers who are building it, and then we have some type of IT operations team that's responsible for the services and responsible for getting the app into our users' hands if it's an enterprise app, right? And then ultimately there's the business, the customers who are demanding the application to be there. And so we start thinking about the different things that happen, right? We see 40% of implementations end up getting reworked because they don't meet the user's original requirements. We start seeing problems with the fact that it can take on average 200 minutes to diagnose or repair a production issue, right? We take that with the fact that the average hourly cost of a failure is $100,000 an hour. You can see how this could really be impactful to a business's operations. And we go down the list, there's all sorts of other things going on, right? Agile is actually really taking off, but we're still running into high IT costs. We're looking at the fact that we're having problems with DevOps being initiated with teams where we're only getting about 40% doing it with a 33% margin. We're lacking executive support. So we're still at the beginning stages. So as much as we're hearing about DevOps all the time, right, we're still facing a lot of friction to getting it into place. Now, we think about mobile DevOps in this type of situation, right? It's often easy to become siloed, right? If you are a mobile developer, which I imagine you are, the fact that you're sitting writing maybe an iOS or you're writing Android apps or even maybe Windows Phone apps, if you're crazy. That was just a joke. The fundamental issue is that very few mobile apps are an island, right? The reality is that you have to integrate into a larger IT process, right? Facebook is a web property that lives and dies by its mobile applications, right? There's all these backend services that make Facebook run, and the mobile app just happens to be the lens or the gateway to those applications. So I think DevOps, we're trying to think about how do we make sure the mobile team is integrated with the larger team and we can be efficient. Now you might be wondering, well, how can you do this? We can't do this. We don't have enough people, or we're too big, right? I hear that a lot. The bigger companies always seem to be the worst. But let's talk about Microsoft, right? Microsoft, by very definition, is one of the largest companies in the world in any number of ways. But for us as software developers, they are someone we can look to for good and bad practices. Microsoft had in their developer division one of the bad stories, right? 2.5 years between major releases was the regular way they delivered software. And they had this very waterfall planning, code, develop, and stabilize mentality. And so what happened was they had to change if they wanted to survive. And so Microsoft, this aircraft carrier of software development, has been changing the way they've been building things. In fact, they even made Forbes this last week on a great article about how they've embraced agility. Where they are today is that they have worked to a process of about 3-week sprints. They have lots of teams doing Scrum, as well as they have teams moving on to more lean and agile practices, doing things like Kanban, etc. But fundamentally, they let the individual teams work out which is best for them, which is a key tenet of agility and Scrum, which is let teams self-organize. And what they do is they do these sprints and these planning sessions that then roll up into larger seasons and visions. And the fundamental aspect about this, they use a build, deploy, test metaphor, and this constant build, learn, and adapt process. The whole idea being that they will produce small units of value on a regular basis. Visual Studio Online, which is something I'm going to show you in just a bit, is an online service that they update about every 3 weeks. In fact, they just did an update this last week. And in those updates, they're delivering, yes, bug fixes, but they're also delivering new value, new features. Sometimes they're just a beginning of a feature, but they're ultimately looking at how they can get things out there faster, get feedback, adapt, and deliver more customer value. By delivering this more customer value, they're going to increase their ability to be a player in the field. And this is what every company wants to do. Now, I often get this question, right? Are mobile apps special? Well, in general, no, right? Good software development practices span platforms. They span programming languages. In fact, as we'll see, right, DevOps is fundamentally about you, the people on the other end of this call, right? Now, when we think about mobile apps, there are additional challenges. Let's be clear, right? There are some special problems out there, right? When we think about mobile DevOps, the first issue is multiple platform support, right? I mean, I'm a Microsoft guy. I have Windows everywhere. I've been using their technology since I got into development in the late 80s. Yes, late 80s. That's a correct term. I'm old. But fundamentally, when it comes to mobile, right, I have an iPhone. I waited for years. I tried a number of Microsoft phones, but the iPhone is what won. And then I got my wife one. And let's be honest, when you're supporting your wife, it's easier to have the same device. I love my iPhone. Now that said, the Windows phones are great. I have Android phones. I have them all. And you as a company and a developer in a company need to make sure you're providing the platform support that your customers want. And you're kind of crazy to ignore iOS these days, right? So you're going to support iOS, and then you're going to look at the number of units of Android apps. You're going to want to support Android. It's like, well, if I use the right technology, I could probably support Windows Phone also, right? So multi-platform does cause some complexity. It causes complexity in the number of build servers you might need, the complexity of your build servers, as well as obviously increases your testing matrix. So we're not ignoring it, but the fact of the matter is the way you do that is the same. Now, mobile apps are often front ends for services. And this is where we get into the canonical basic synchronization problem that we have in development, right? One thing you do have to think about, particularly if you're publishing to app stores, is that your services have to be versioned and have to support multiple versions running at once. There's nothing worse than pushing a new app into the app store and having users open it up and find that there's trouble, and that trouble is caused by the fact that they're out of sync with the back end. So yes, you do need to think about your deployment strategy for managing your services, how they roll out, and make sure that they're rolled out before the app hits the new app store. And that does mean maintaining version compatibility. So yes, there's a little more rigor required in your process, but this is nothing new. We've done this for a year with rich clients talking to mid-tier services, and yes, often persistence layers. Your databases have to be thought of in a special capacity. If you use SQL Server, for example, Redgate has done a lot of work around database lifecycle management and how you can automate and manage that process. But fundamentally, we're just talking about coordinating our efforts across teams, and as you can see, that's a major tenet of DevOps. Now, app stores are probably the most painful part of mobile development, right? If you need to be pushed into an app store, none of the vendors, Microsoft, Apple, or Google, are really DevOps friendly. They require humans be involved, logging in, clicking buttons, and submitting apps into the store. And until the vendors get enough feedback, and sadly, Apple tends to be less responsive these days because they're the big gorilla. They think they're doing everything perfect. We're not going to see a lot of movement here. That doesn't mean we don't do DevOps everywhere else. We just realize that we need to cross-train, have more than one person be prepared to submit and handle interaction with Apple and the other vendors in the app stores, Microsoft included. Now, the other thing to be aware of is, right, in general, especially on the consumer side, apps are pulled by users. Now, in iOS as an example, right, Apple has done a great job in providing options that kind of guide the user to stay current, right? Automatically update when you're on Wi-Fi, right? Stay current. You know, Apple has some incredible figures about customers being on the most current versions of the operating system. So that's good news in general. But the fact of the matter is, users are generally in control of pulling a new version of the app rather than having it pushed out, which is traditional IT. Now, that said, in an enterprise, you can have more control. Microsoft, for example, has something called Intune, which lets you push apps out to your users' devices. It lets you create policies that says, if this device is connected to my corporate network and uses my corporate resources, it needs to have these security policies and these apps. So there are ways to deal with it in the enterprise, but once again, that's nothing new. That's just something that means the mobile app fits into that category, something that has to be managed. Now, I've been cranking away here because I want to get to some demos, but I'm just going to make sure. Are there any questions? Is anybody confused? Are we doing okay? I don't see anything in the chat window. I'm going to just take a quick jump over here to my presenter view. Looks like we have no questions. Oh, teaser of what I'm going to show you guys in just a bit. All right, we'll come back here. All right, looking good. How do you get started? Well, I know some people hate to hear this because a lot of people just want to buy it, but it's really a learn from others approach, right? And I like to start with what is the go-to example in our industry, which is 10 plus deploys per day, right? This was the outcome of a talk by a couple gentlemen from Flickr, Alsop and Hammond. And this was done at Velocity back in 2009, so we're talking 6 years now. And if you break down their talk into the core major tenets, the first one is automated infrastructure. We want to get away from individual developers doing things. We want to get away from individual IT pros managing things, right? The days of the IT data center managed by a person doing remote desktop or terminal serving in or using VNC to connect to servers is gone, right? Even the concept of connecting with SSH to manage your servers is not what we want. We want automation through scripts, automated tools to manage our systems that can help us reduce problems. It also means we can focus on the core business needs, right? No one wants to spend money on a button clicker at the end of the day. If this is how you make your living, you are a person who's going to be looking for new work. People that stay employed are people that deliver value. People who deliver value figure ways to automate and figure ways to continue to adapt the business. Now, shared version control. So, right, DevOps is that bringing together of developers and IT operations. Often those groups are separated, and they're separated both from a behavioral pattern but also a tooling pattern. And one of the things that also haven't found worked a lot for Flickr, and that we're seeing working in enterprises that are embracing DevOps today, is this sharing of information. And it starts with sharing at the version control level. When you think about your environments and your platforms, there's lots of common scripting tools that allow us to interact with systems. On Windows, there's PowerShell. There's any number of batch scripting environments in the Linux and OS X world that you can use. And fundamentally, what we're looking at is, when I go to build something as a developer, how does this work in production? And if it requires me to configure anything on a machine, I need to start thinking automation. What I encourage my Windows developers to do is learn PowerShell. And then the next time they need a feature, let's say you need a feature enabled inside IIS, Microsoft's web server. What are you going to do? You're going to learn how to configure with PowerShell and put that into a shared repo. Then you're going to let your IT pros know it, and they can take it and add to their larger scale deployment tools. If you're using Chef and Puppet, the same thing applies. You can write those base scripts as developers and then work with your IT pros to make them production ready. Now, the next thing is this notion of one-step build and deploy, right? Whenever possible, we want to be able to take code that we've worked on, check it in, have some automated continuous integration process, take it, possibly run some automated smoke tests, and then get it deployed to the appropriate staging environment. Now, once again, with mobile apps, there are ways to get fairly far, right? Getting to the App Store, as I said, generally requires that extra last mile of human steps. But we can have automated builds. We can get to some automated deployment steps if we use the right tools. And so these are things that really are a winning solution. And once again, if you think about a mobile app, it's not just the mobile app itself that runs on the phone. It's the mobile app and the services. So all the services stuff, particularly if you control or manage them in a cloud-based environment, can be automated, right? We've got a big win there. So using the fact that you're building a mobile app as an excuse not to have DevOps doesn't cut it, right? There's only that last mile that tends to be difficult. Everything else can be automated. Another change you want to think about is your application design. I mentioned the fact that your services have to be resilient in the face of multiple mobile clients of different versions trying to connect. What we've been thinking about in the last few years is this, and once again, Allsop and Hammond talked about it way back in 2009, is design your application to support a factored delivery model where maybe not all the features are enabled. And therefore, what you do is you have feature flags. The ability to determine which features of your application light up at what time based upon the ability of the code to deliver that feature. So a good example is if you think about adding a feature to an application, it might require a change at the database level, a change at the service level, a change in the client and both functionality and user experience, the UI. Well, for a lot of teams, right, some changes can't be implemented on a single sprint unless a single deployment. So what you have to do is do it in layers, right? Get the database change out there, start adding the service code, and then maybe some of the client code's actually in there, but it doesn't light up, and that's because it's dormant. And then through configuration magic, it gets lit up once the feature's all there. Shared metrics is critical, right? There's nothing worse than developers being yelled at because something's wrong with the application and then being able to go, well, what happened? How did you guys know this, right? One of the key things that the folks at Flickr said is you want to have shared dashboards so you have analytics and metrics about what's going on. Taking the next level, those metrics can also help us determine what features our users are using and what features they want in the future. And finally, the key tenet of all this is communication, right? No blame, right? We're all in this together, right? It's changing the fact of the matter that we're not just developers in IT, we are one team with one purpose, to support the organization and deliver value, right? People that use your application don't care if you're a developer and IT pro, they don't care what department you're in, they don't care what language you use. They care that the application works, is performant, and does what they need it to do. So everybody has to get off their high horse and work together for that common solution. I highly encourage you to take a look at the talk. I will warn you, there is a little bit of adult language, nothing more than PG. But also been Hammond delivered a great talk. You can find the link up there on the screen, and we'll give it to you at the end. But fundamentally, if you watch this talk, it should resonate with you on what you should be able to do in your organization. Now, I will admit, organizations such as Flickr have an advantage. When you control the entire back end and you're doing the web deployment, you have a little more control as opposed to delivering to customers. That doesn't mean you can't do as much DevOps as possible within your control center, and then, yes, hand off things as necessary. Now, I'm not seeing any questions or chats, so I think we're okay. But if there are, just let me know. So as I said, people are the key. So in your organization, it starts with, can we all get along? So you need to break down the barriers, break down your organizations. This one's hard. People do not like to give up control, right? What people want is to maintain their power structure, maintain their authority. So this is where one of the things is hard. Now you can do a lot even on your own if you're just one developer by embracing that automation, coming up from the bottom, but it does require top-down buy-in. You can start with virtual teams, right, where you bring teams together and try and prove it on a proof of concept. Take a particular application or a service within your larger scale application to work on. But ultimately, you want to move to real DevOps teams. This means where a team is a unit, and where Microsoft has had success in their Visual Studio Online environment, for example, is that they have teams that own everything end to end. That means from the code that developers write through the check-in all the way to production. In other words, they have access to everything end to end, and they're responsible for deploying their feature within the larger unit of work, which is the service. Okay, and also it's about embracing Kaizen. Now, when we think about embracing Kaizen, we're talking about that next step, right? First is people. The humans have to have buy-in. If people aren't willing to do it, you're not going to succeed. The next step is changing your process. And the best way to think about it is when you think about Kaizen is that this concept of continuous improvement, right? You need to constantly be working to make changes. Probably the biggest mistake people make when they want to do DevOps is that they say they're going to do it, they give it a couple of weeks, and then they roll over and fail because they try to do too much at once. Ultimately, what you need to do is take baby steps. Make sure you have these baseline things in place, right? So start embracing agility, start embracing the idea of what continuous delivery looks like, and so be starting with, yes, let's make sure we're using version control, let's make sure we're using builds, and continue to add those layers until you have an end-to-end process, right? But ultimately, it means taking step-by-step approaches and giving it time. Right, we talk about, in the old days, we talk about people learning COM. It would take a competent C++ developer at least 6 months to be a COM developer. For doing DevOps organizations, we're talking possibly years to get full-blown, depending upon the size of the organization. Right? It's a time-based process that needs to be continually worked on. You don't magically just buy it. Now, that said, you know, I'm a tactical person. At the end of the day, if I get the buy-in and people are saying, okay, we're going to try this, how are we going to do this? And tooling can help. And ultimately, the idea behind tooling is that we want to remove that friction from our day-to-day and automate as much as we can. So if I were to break DevOps down then into 4 sections around tooling, we might break it down into this setup where we have development and production on either side working hand in hand. And we start with a planning phase, into a development and test phase, we release and into production, and then we monitor and learn. And notice this is a circle, right? The key thing with agile practices is that it's a continuous process. We're not looking at it as a destination, but as a journey, all right? So we start thinking of planning, right? It starts with that idea, right? I want to deliver an application, or I've got an application out there I have to deliver a new feature. And so we need to plan, manage, and track our progress. And different people at different levels within the organization want different views of what's going on. Management wants to look at things at the high level. Maybe it's completely at the large feature level, right? We're going to add support for a third-party integration service, a new security system. Whereas a developer might be very focused on the task of, I need to add support to my Xamarin app running on iOS. So let's talk about how you can do this. So I'm going to switch out and switch over here to my web browser. Now, the first thing I want to show you is the home page for my sample team project. So I'm using something called Visual Studio Online, and you'll notice I'm running here on OS 10. Microsoft's Visual Studio Online is their cloud-based service that's available for you and your team to track and manage all your work. It supports version control. As you can see, it supports work tracking. We support builds and online testing. Now, the first thing to understand about Visual Studio Online is it is cross-platform. You just need a web browser that supports JavaScript and HTML. So there's no Java, there's no ActiveX, no Silverlight when using the web-based interface. And to get your account, you simply have to go to visualstudio.com and sign up for free with a Microsoft account. In fact, you can sign up for free and bring 4 of your friends, and Microsoft's not going to charge you. You get unlimited private repos today, and those repos can be using Microsoft's traditional Team Foundation version control, or you can use Git, which is what I'm using here today. In fact, if we take a look at the home and click on code, what we'll see here is that I've got a Git repository, and I've got some source code in here, and we see things like I have the ability to see online history. All right, and if we come over here, we can see that this was a big check-in where I added my demo app to the application. And one of the things we get here is this ability to create great traceability as to why I did this. We'll see that I had a task 31, add demo project to Git repo, right here in the center of the screen, associated with this commit. Okay, and I'm going to show you how I did all this. If we come back over here to the Explorer, I can drill down. Once again, look at the different folders. So we can expand this in here. We see I have a XAML app, master detail. And if we go to the app delegate file, we can see the contents in line. We then have the ability to edit in our browser if we need to make a quick change. That would be backed by a commit. We can look at the history for this particular file. I can even compare in browser to the previous versions. So this is really slick, right? And you notice that it's working in my browser. I didn't have to install or do anything special. It just works, and you can try this yourself. Now, developers definitely want to have code, but as I mentioned, we have this need to plan and track what's going on. And so if we go to the Work Hub, what we'll see is we have the ability to break our work down into logical units that we typically refer to as sprints. But you can call them whatever you want, milestones, iterations, etc. And it starts with typically some kind of backlog, a user's wish list. What do we want to build? So let me get here. So you'll see right now I've got a backlog item pre-talk, and we'll add a new one. Present talk on DevOps for Xamarin. Publish slides and artifacts. Right, so I can quickly add new items to my backlog. I can then assign them to a particular sprint here by just simply using drag and drop. And if I double click on this, I can get the detailed form, whereas I could assign this to myself or whoever's on my team, get things like autocomplete. So there's really nice, rich experience here. We can see that this is a new backlog item, so I can save and close that. And I can reorder things based upon priority. If I decide I wanted to do this first, I can move it up here. Now that probably doesn't make sense though, because I'm in the pre-talk, so we'll put that back here. In fact, I've got this pre-talk, so let's take a look at what has a task underneath here called Get Everything Connected. Well, this is shown in progress. So we have this backlog view that I can see both at the top level view as well as I can see at the individual sprint view. And we can see this drill down. I can also see it on a task board. Right, so this is a common agile tool that we use. This is a digital version. And so we have Get Everything Connected. Well, I think I did that. So we're going to drag and drop this and mark this as complete. And then I can even come over here to this work item and mark this as done. All right. Now if we go back over here to our main backlog, we'll see that I have a Kanban board, which allows me to see the various top-level work items, these PBIs, these product backlog items, of what I'm needing to do. And so I'm going to come over here and edit this, and we'll open it up, and we'll assign this to myself. And we'll put this into Sprint 1 also, so I can do it in this particular mechanism. Now, when you work with work items, you'll see we have the ability to have lots of rich history. For example, when we look at my prepared demos work item, I have a bunch of links over here, and this links me to all my individual child items. And it turns out you can also have parent items that group your PBIs into logical units. So you can go over here and create features, and we'll call this Xamarin Webcast November 9. and we'll put that to in progress. And if I go to the backlog here, I can put my PBIs under it and create a logical grouping of that. So one of the things I can do is turn on mapping. And so what I'm going to do here is give this a second, and we'll actually go down to the product backlog items. And now I can come over and take these and drag them onto there. And now if we go to my feature list on my backlog, and we'll hide the, turn off the mapping, we'll see that we have my Xamarin webcast for tomorrow. We got the parents here, and these one are in a new state. So the features are the container type to let us track things that take longer than a single sprint. PBIs let us logically group more than one task, typically a developer doing something and a tester doing something, into a current sprint. So we have features, we have backlogs, and you may have noticed there's even the ability to have larger items known as epics, right? Those vision items that take, like a year or two to create. So now we've got these particular items. We go back to the board, and I can drag and drop them into new states. For example, I'm going to approve the fact that I'm going to publish slides and artifacts, but I'm committed to doing this talk right now. Now you notice that over here we have these tasks on the list, and notice they're all checked off. Let's add another task here. We'll call this do the presentation. And so the way we're going to do that is I'll click here, add task, present, talk. And we'll do demo in talk. So now I've added those tasks. Those are associated with this PBI, and that means if I go to the spread board, we'll now see these tasks here, and I can edit them in line, assign them. I can specify how long it's going to take. We'll say this will take an hour. We'll put that in progress. And this one we'll say is going to take me 0.25 an hour. And we'll put that in progress. So the number here represents its ID, lets you find it. And then we have this one down, the approved state. I can reorder these items by going to the backlog here and specify that prepare demo, since it's done, we'll put down there. And pre-talk is done, so we'll move that there. And so let's bring this down, a little drag and drop. And so now if we go to the board, the items that are done are collapsed up automatically down here, and then you see the work that's going on. Okay, so we have the ability to visualize our work. We have the ability to assign the work to people. Then how do we work with this? Well, as you might expect, right, by using Git, that means we have the ability to connect to this Visual Studio Online repo from just about any platform that supports Git. In fact, arguably, if you don't support Git, you're not really an active platform. So what I did earlier is I went over and cloned the repo. So if you click the clone button, they'll give you the endpoint. And all you need to do is go to a command line or go to your favorite IDE and provide that URL and connect. Now, when you connect to Git Online, today, Visual Studio Online supports connecting with their tooling, as well as connecting through any Git client using what are called alternate credentials. The way you configure alternate credentials is you come into your name here and go to your profile, and underneath your profile, they support two different mechanisms. They support what are known as alternate credentials, and they encourage you not to use alternate credentials unless your tool doesn't support the new mechanism. If it does support if it supports alternate credentials, you can use this, or you can use personal access tokens, which uses OAuth. And you'll see that I've used this for Git as well as for the TFS command line tools for doing build. The bottom line is you need to have either these alternate credentials or personal access tokens today to connect from OS 10. So I'm going to go back to this project, and then I'm going to switch desktops here and switch over to Xamarin Studio. So what you'll see here is, here's my solution in Xamarin Studio. And what I'm going to do here is we'll just come into one of my files. How about main.cs? And we'll make a comment. Brian was here again in Xamarin Studio. All right, a tour de force change. And we'll save our change. And then what I'll do is I'll go to version control. And what I'm going to do is do review solution and commit. And so we'll see there's my change. And so we'll say add comment to main.cs for demo. and we'll click commit. And when I commit, this of course, if you've used Git, will commit the change to my local repo, but I want to share this with my team. So what I'm going to do is say push changes to remote repository and commit. And we'll say push changes. And it wants my alternate credentials, so I'll log in, because I haven't done anything this morning. All right, and so we see for Xamarin here, it says push operation successfully completed. So let's jump back over to my browser, and let's go over to my code hub. And what we'll see is if we go to history, add comment to main.cs. So I click in there, we see the change, and we see the information there. Now, one thing I didn't do is I didn't justify why I did that work. This often happens when you forget to include the work item. Now, remember earlier, if we go back to my history, I was able to show you that, for example, add period to source. And when we click this, we'll see it associated with task 32. And we go to task 32, we see that this was linked to these commits. So this traceability is really valuable to see why people are doing things. So if we review what I did earlier, if we go over to work and go into the task board, you'll see I have demo and talk. And so what I really want to do is associate it with that commit. So I didn't do it from Xamarin Studio, but I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So we'll come over here and we're going to link it using the work item form. So we'll click the link, we'll pick commit, and then I'll come over here and browse, and I can pick myself and say find only my commits. And we'll click the button there. And now what I've done is I'm linking this commit to this work item. This is basically creating that traceability of why did I do this. So I'll save and close this. Now let's go back over to Xamarin Studio and I'll make one more change and I'll do it the right way. So let's go into the app delegate and we'll make a comment here. Added using statements to integrate hockey app. All right, so we'll save that change. Whoops, hit the wrong button. And now what we'll do is we'll go to version control, review solution and commit, and select add comment about hockey app. And then all I do is I put the hash symbol and the number for the work item. If I can't remember the work item, I just go quickly back over here. Oh, it's 41. So we'll go back over here to the desktop, and we'll change that to 41. And then what I'm going to do is commit this locally, and then we'll push the changes up to my remote repo. Okay. And now it's successful, so I'll switch back over. And if we go to the Code Hub, and we'll look at the history. And we'll see add comment about hockey app number 41. And you'll see one associated work item. So this really gives you that nice traceability to see what you did and why you did it. And this is important, right? Because when you're doing comments inside your source code, you want to be verbose enough, right? You don't want to write too little comments, but you don't want to write an entire story because things often change. Work items are where we collect the core reasoning and the logic and the details of what the changes were. And by doing this linking, we get this great traceability back and forth. Now, what I love about Microsoft Solution, of course, is that I'm able to do this in Xamarin Studio, but with Xamarin's great partnership with Microsoft and being plugged into Visual Studio, I can do this all from within Visual Studio 2015. So if I come over here to my Windows machine, we'll jump out of PowerPoint, and then we'll come over here to Visual Studio 2015. We can see that I've got this same solution available here. So what I'm going to do is go to Team Explorer first, and Team Explorer is simply Microsoft's visual gateway to Git and to Visual Studio Online. You can use the Git command line tools if you wanted, but I'm able to come over here and say, let's do a fetch. Were there any changes since I last synchronized? And sure enough, there's the two changes I made earlier. So what I'm going to do here is pull these changes down. And now if I come over here and open my solution, what we're going to see here is the same solution that I'm working on in Xamarin Studio is available to me in Visual Studio. And if we scroll to the top of this app delegate, there's the comment I made earlier. And just to be complete, if we open up main.cs, there's the other comment I made. So we have this great connection information, and of course, looks like I need to start my build server. So we'll just switch back over here and fire that up for the build host. And we'll minimize that. And I can go back to my Windows machine, give it a second, and it should connect on my local network. And there we go. Okay, so let's review what I've shown you so far. Right, I have the ability to use Visual Studio Online, and as I said, you get up to 5 free users. And by the way, if you have an MSDN subscription, that gives you a free user. So you get 5 free without MSDN, and as many people that have MSDN can join to your team project for free. If you have a large organization, you can also integrate with Azure Active Directory, so you can use your same corporate login as you do on premises to connect to Visual Studio Online in the cloud. And the other thing I'll mention is almost everything I've shown you today is available on premises if you use Team Foundation Server 2015. Obviously, that requires more work, so I'm a big fan of the cloud these days. So we're able to come in here and define what our work is, what our team wants to do. And one of the things you'll note here is that I'm using the built-in breakdown of mechanism, using the built-in Scrum board, and I'm using the built-in Kanban board, which allows you to track things from new, approved, committed, and done. But one of the things we often think about is, well, when we're done, what happens for the DevOps team? In other words, how do we track the process of getting things into a release pipeline? And one of the great things about Visual Studio Online and Team Foundation Servers, they support this notion of teams within a team project. And those teams allow us to have multiple backlogs. So you can actually have a separate backlog just for your team. In addition, you have full customization abilities to add additional swim lanes and additional columns. For example, I can come in here to the board and specify that, for example, in the committed committed column, I want to have a doing and done. So let's take a look at what that looks like. And we'll refresh. Okay, so right now I'm doing the talk, but I'm not completely done. Okay. Another thing you can do is you can do a fast track swim lane. So if we come over here, you can add a new one and call this fast track. This is useful when you have a bug or something that needs to be fast tracked into getting done. You can also add additional swim lanes, or your own columns. For example, you could have a security validation, or for example, we're dealing with mobile apps deployed to the App Store. So you can come over here and add a new column. Or we can do something, how about App Store deployments? And we'll move this after committed. And so what we can say there is that, look, if it's not deployed to the App Store, then we're not completely done. Okay? So it's things like that that give you a lot of flexibility in using Visual Studio Online. Another thing people have asked for is when they're working with these different cards is to have the ability to have different colors and things like that. For example, I can come in here to settings. I can add an extra field. A good example is if someone's blocked. So we'll add that to the card. And then we'll go to styles, and if someone's blocked, we'll add a styling rule that says that if blocked is equal to yes, we're going to turn it to this nice red. So right now all my cards look fine. We'll refresh, neither is blocked. We'll change this to yes, and then I'll notice that that card is bright red. Okay, let me just double check on any questions, make sure everybody's okay. I don't see any questions, and no one's shouting at me, so I think we're okay. All right, fantastic. All right, but I'm not really blocked on this, so we're going to change this. All right, fantastic. So when we think about this, first thing is having a place where people can view what's going on and track their work, right? That's critically important. And in fact, one of the great things about Visual Studio Online also is that even people that are not directly in the DevOps team can see this information. Visual Studio Online allows for what we call limited stakeholders. And stakeholders are people that want to view what's going on, but aren't going to be actively involved in the process of writing code, running builds, and writing tests. But they might want to be able to come in here and comment on a work item. So I could go to my account, for example, and if I go here to my users, what I could do is add a new user to my account. So for example, I can add Mark Smith, add Xamarin.com. Now Mark, there's different levels I could add him at, but if I add him as a stakeholder and I click send invitation, he's going to get an email that'll allow him to join up, and once he signs in with his live ID, he'll be able to join this team. And what I could do is go back to my team, and I will add him as a team member. And he'll be able to see what's going on, and if he wanted to get creative, he can fill in information in a task. So we'll see if he wants to play with that during the talk if he's not too busy paying attention. All right. Now, the other thing I want to show you real quick before I move on to the next section, which is getting more automation in here, is this notion of the dashboard. One of the things they added in this last sprint, this was literally done last week, is Microsoft added this heads-up display dashboard so you can quickly see how your team is doing. So here right now we see a board, or a tile, excuse me, with all the tasks that are in progress. Over here we have some fast track shortcut links to take me to my task board, to my Kanban board. Excuse me. Over here we see that I've added a build widget. This is showing me the status of my automated builds, which we're going to drill into in just a moment. I can see the progress on my sprint, how many working days I have, percentage of bugs versus stories. I don't have any bugs right now, but we can change that later. And you'll see I have the ability to add new work items right from this home page. As you can see by the plus sign here, I can click this, and this will let me have access to additional widgets. For example, I can add code tiles to show me the number of changes that have been done to my repository. So let's add one of those. I can add additional custom work item query results. I can add burn down charts, sprint capacity, team rooms, as well as we'll have an SDK in a bit to be able to do our own. So we'll click add there. And now I have a code tile. I'm going to configure the widget and say I want to see changes made in my master repo. So I'll save that. And then I can even drag and drop that up here. And we'll move the work tile up there. Looks good. And we'll move that over there. And we'll do that. Nope, I got a little excited there. All right, so now I've got my new home page. I got my 9 commits in the last 7 days to my repo, 2 work items that are active, and then my builds that are going on. So once again, you get this heads-up display that anybody who's a member of your team can see. And as I said, you can add stakeholders, a limited number for free to your account. All right, so now I have one more slide that I'll just go back to for completeness before I do some more demos. And this is notion of developing and test, right? So we're going to be writing code. Unit tests are definitely something you want to embrace. Obviously, having version control. I know it's crazy this day and age, but the number of teams I run into that still don't have a very good version control practice, definitely not one that's enterprise-wide or shared between developments and IT, is huge. It's even something that's an easy trap to fall into as a mobile developer if you're the person who does mobile, right? In a lot of organizations, there's that guy, that gal who does most of the mobile work, and so they're kind of isolated on their own. They might do things their way, and you're feeling like, hey, I use Dropbox, I'll just shove it in there, and that's good enough. You really want version control, right? Version control is going to give you that audit trail, that history of why you did it. It's shared, it's visible. And with Git being ubiquitous across all the platforms, you have no reason not to use it, because even Git can be used for free. You don't have to use Visual Studio Online, but you need to do something. The next thing that we need to do is this notion of getting it to build on someone else's machine, right? A notorious problem we run into with software development is worked on my machine. And the reason it does is because you forgot to, it works great there because you do all the work, but when you try and share it with someone else, they can't compile it because you're missing a component, you missed a file, whatever. And so having a regular mechanism where you can check to see if changes are done correctly and are passing build muster is really critical. And the way we can do that is with some kind of automated build system. Now, in the open source world, we have things like Jenkins, which is really popular. Microsoft wants to make this better for everybody. And obviously, being a Windows company, people think, okay, what are they going to do for me as a Xamarin developer? Well, let's show you that, right? So if I go to the Build Hub, Microsoft has completely rethought build in their current release. They worked on it over the last year in public, and with the release of T Foundation Server 2015 on premises, they went go live up in the cloud also. And what you can see here is this little link that says, we've built a new scriptable build system that's web-based and cross-platform. And this is just absolutely awesome. If I click this plus sign to create a new build, what we're going to see here is that I've got a number of build templates. And look what shows up there right up front, Xamarin.Android and Xamarin.iOS. This is absolute money. This is just fantastic. The ability to have a centralized build location that works cross-platform is just wonderful. And yes, Microsoft even has Xcode. What I did here is I created my own build called XamMD Demo. If I go and edit it, I simply used this build step. And what you do is you click Add Build Step, and you'll see all sorts of cross-platform build monkeys here, including Android and Xamarin.iOS. If we go to Test, we'll see things like testing for web load testing, publishing test results, and then notice, yes, there's even support for Xamarin Test Cloud and Visual Studio Online. So you can have a great experience using Visual Studio Online for free, as well as being able to do your builds and integrate with Xamarin Test Cloud. Now for Build Online, you get 240 build minutes for free using the hosted build. And that will work for your Xamarin.Android projects. For Xamarin.iOS, though, unfortunately, you have to provide the build server. There's a number of ways to do this. You can use hosting services like Mac and Cloud. You could put your own agent up there in the cloud, or you can run it on premises. And I want to point out that's what I'm doing here. Now, because I'm doing this as a demo, we'll find that I've got terminal running here. There we go. And I've got terminal running on my machine. I've called it Agent Smith, and you can install as many agents as you want. And what will happen is when a build is kicked off, it'll try and talk to my agent. So let's go back over to the web browser, and we'll go to the admin hub. And what we'll do is we'll come up here to the control panel. And what we'll see is we have an agent pool set up, and I have a default pool, and you can see I've got this green bar that shows that my MacBook is enabled and ready for builds. So what I'm going to do here is make a change to the build definition. So you notice that I specified my XamMD demo solution. You can do additional overrides. I can build for the simulator if I want to. And then if I come over here to options, one of the things I can do is specify that I want to build more than one configuration, so I can do a debug and release build. I can create new work items if the build fails. I can also support continuous integration. And this means when I check into a particular branch within my repo, I can cause the build to execute. So we're going to turn that on. General has additional settings. I can control the build number format, for example. I can have what are called demands. In this case, I'm specifying that I have to have the Xamarin.iOS features enabled on the agent. So when you install the agent, it takes a look at the machine and sees what's installed, and then registers that back with Visual Studio Online. So my Mac has said that, hey, I can build Xamarin.iOS. You can have retention policies, how long you're going to keep your builds. And one of the features I've been waiting for years from Microsoft is create this history option to show us why changes were made to the build definition. So I'm going to save my change, and we'll say changed build to be CI. So we'll click OK. And what's great is we'll see that history change come up. I can come in here and I can even diff the changes, and we get which are just stored as JSON. And we'll see that I turned on the fact that this is a CI build. And now all I have to do is go make a change. So let's jump over to Visual Studio on my Windows machine. And we'll say Brian was here on Windows and Visual Studio 2015. So I'll save my change. Now I'll come over here, see my changes here, add comment from VS 2015. We'll do a commit, and then we're going to come over here to the sync pane. We're going to do a fetch, make sure there's no one else making changes. Okay, I'm good to go. So we're going to push my commit up. And what's going to happen is that's going to kick off a build. In fact, in a second, we can see running job build. There we go. And if we go over here to the website, we see we have a build queued. And one of the great things is we have this live build report to show us how our build is doing. And so it's kicking off the build. It's running right now, and the build succeeded. So all this is configured for an end-to-end experience. And granted, I am doing a demo, so it's running off my Mac, which I wouldn't do normally for production. I'd set up a Mac Mini at least to be my build server. And I have this end-to-end experience so everybody can commit to Git, track our work, and check in. Now, when we think about this entire process, you might want to go a little further. And there's lots of different things you can do about this. One of the next steps that typically comes into play is how do I test? There's a lot of different things you can do there. One of the first things you might want to do is make it easier for people to test on their iPhones. And Microsoft had acquired a company called Hockey App, which allows you to do that. So you can look at Hockey App as one way to do it. And then there's Xamarin Test Cloud, which allows you to integrate and do tests, etc. That requires a bit more setup and a bit more work, and once again would require its own little hour-long talk at a minimum. But I want you to think about that, and then I also want you to think about how you get feedback from your users, right? So if we come back over here and start thinking about the end game, when you release, you got to start thinking about how you get things into different environments. For your web services and your databases, there's no excuse not to use some deployment tool. Microsoft has a new release management tool that's available. There's Octopus Deploy. There's other third parties out there that offer deployment tools. So those are things you want to think about. You want to create integrated testing environments. Microsoft has testing tools for working with your services and for working with your web user interfaces. Obviously, Xamarin Test Cloud is a great product that you can use to do automated testing on different devices. That does require some kind of license, of course, to Xamarin and a service contract. And I'm not an expert on licensing and spending money, so you want to talk to your Xamarin folks about the best deal you can get there. And then there's this notion of getting to monitor and learning. Once again, analytics are a great tool here. Hockey App has a great way for you to do testing monitoring and get feedback from users when they're doing testing. And then you have Xamarin Analytics, Microsoft Insights, and even Preemptive Solutions have different tools that let you put analytic data into your application and your services and have feedback to those centralized dashboards that can be shared between operations and development. So all those things are really important to the entire DevOps process. So hopefully you've seen that I've given you kind of this tip of the iceberg of thinking about DevOps for mobile. And as I said, I mean, it's kind of a misnomer, right? Other than a few odd problems we run into, particularly app stores, mobile DevOps is still just DevOps. It means people first, having that communication in place, a good process end-to-end where you automate as much as possible. And then ultimately, yes, get the right tools for the job that work for you and your organization. What's amazing is what vendors are providing available for free. And then even for just a simple monthly plan for a few bucks a month, you can get some great stuff. So I encourage you to take a look at what Microsoft has to offer. And once again, I'm just really a big fan, so I have a bias here. But I think what you get with Visual Studio Online for free is super compelling. Remember, you get 5 users for free. You don't have to give Microsoft any money. You get 240 build minutes for free. Or you can step up and get access to additional features like lab management, application telemetry, etc. And I just want to end with one final thought before I take a look at any more questions we might have. And that is, don't let your experience be an impediment to your ability to learn and grow. One of the problems that you run into, and I run into with lots of organizations, is people have been doing this 5, 10, 20 years. And it's kind of like, oh, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Or, when I was a child and I did this, and when I did punch cards. Don't do that. Look to innovate. It's a constant learning. Embrace Kaizen. So I wanted to say thank you very much for coming to this webinar. I hope I provided you with some ideas and showed you some of the great possibilities that are out there. Go get yourself a free account for Microsoft and give it a try. And once again, whether it's a Mac, a Linux box, or Windows machine, Microsoft really wants to be your ALM hub for DevOps. And once again, here's my contact information. Thank you very much. All right, let's see if we have any questions that I missed in the queue. Wow, is there no questions? Really? Wow, I was so concise. Said everything perfectly. I don't believe that, but I'm not seeing any questions, so.